Victoria Harrington stared at the impossible solution written across the blackboard by a man in a grease-stained jumpsuit, her father's decade-old promise suddenly crushing the air from her lung. Marcus Chun had just solved the equation that destroyed the careers of Nobel Prize winner, and the prize was her hand in marriage. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor with a sound like breaking ice. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. All eyes in the glittering ballroom turned toward the source of the commotion, toward the young woman in the crimson dress who stood frozen at the top of the grand staircase, her hand still extended in the air where the glass had slipped from her fingers. Victoria Harrington didn't notice the mess at her feet or the 100 pairs of eyes boring into her. She was staring at something else entirely. At someone else entirely. At the man in the worn gray mechanic's jumpsuit who had just walked through the service entrance of her father's estate. He wasn't supposed to be here. Nobody dressed like that was supposed to be here. This was the annual Harrington Foundation Gala, an event where the price of admission was measured in 7 figures and the dress code was strictly black tie. The man moved through the sea of tuxedos and evening gowns like a ghost. His presence so incongruous it felt like a glitch in reality. Security should have stopped him. The event coordinators should have turned him away. Instead, he walked with quiet purpose toward the center of the room, his dark eyes scanning the crowd with an intensity that made Victoria's breath catch in her throat. Her father, Edmund Harrington, the steel magnate whose fortune could buy small countries, stepped forward from his position near the stage. His face was a mask of barely controlled fury. He raised his hand and 2 security guards materialized from the shadows, moving to intercept the intruder. But the man in the jumpsuit simply raised his own hand, a gesture of peace, and spoke in a voice that somehow carried across the entire ballroom despite its quiet tone. "I'm here to solve the problem," he said. "The Harrington problem." The room erupted into whispers. Victoria felt her knees go weak. She gripped the ornate banister to steady herself, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The Harrington problem. Those 3 words had haunted her family for a decade, had become something of an urban legend in certain circles, a mathematical impossibility that her father had offered a king's ransom to solve. 10 years ago, Edmund Harrington had published a theorem, a complex proof that had revolutionized financial modeling and made him billions. But embedded within that theorem was a single unsolved equation, an elegant puzzle that had stumped the greatest mathematical minds in the world. Her father, in a moment of theatrical grandeur, had offered a prize for its solution. Not just money, though the sum was staggering. He had offered something far more valuable. He had offered his daughter's hand in marriage. It was meant to be a joke, a publicity stunt. Victoria had been 15 years old at the time, a gangly teenager with braces and an obsession with astronomy. The idea that anyone would actually solve the equation, that anyone would actually claim the prize, had seemed absurd. Her father had laughed about it in interviews, had used it to promote his foundation and his legacy, but the years had passed and the equation remained unsolved. Victoria had grown into a woman, had earned degrees in mathematics and philosophy from Cambridge, become her father's heir apparent in everything but name, and the equation, that impossible, mocking string of symbols, had become a shadow that followed her everywhere. She had seen brilliant men try and fail. She had watched as Nobel laureates had presented their attempts at conferences only to have fatal flaws exposed in their logic. She had received marriage proposals from suitors who claimed they could solve it, only to discover they were charlatans or fools. The Harrington problem had become a curse, a barrier between her and any genuine human connection. Men saw her not as Victoria, but as a prize to be won, a trophy at the end of an intellectual conquest. And now this man, this stranger in a mechanic's uniform, had walked into her world and spoken those words with absolute certainty. Her father's voice cut through the whispers, sharp and cold. "Who are you?" Edmund Harrington demanded, his posture rigid with offense. "How did you get past security?" The man finally looked up, and for the first time Victoria saw his face clearly. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with dark, tired eyes and the kind of weathered features that spoke of a hard life. There was a grease stain on his collar and chalk dust on his fingers. He didn't belong in this world of inherited wealth and designer labels, and yet he stood there with a calm dignity that made everyone else in the room seem somehow smaller. "My name is Marcus Chun," he said simply. "I work at Henderson's Auto Repair on 5th Street, and I got past your security because I have the solution to your equation. I'm here to claim what you promised." The ballroom erupted into chaos. Laughter, sharp and cruel, echoed from every corner. A man in a tuxedo near the bar actually doubled over, clutching his stomach. A woman in diamonds whispered something to her companion, and they both smirked. Victoria felt heat rise to her cheeks, a mixture of humiliation and something else, something she couldn't quite name. Quote, her father's face had gone from fury to a kind of amused contempt. "You?" Edmund said, his voice dripping with disdain. "A mechanic? You think you can solve an equation that has stumped Fields Medal winners and professors from MIT? Marcus Chun didn't flinch. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn and creased from being carried for who knew how long. "I don't think, Mr. Harrington, I know, and I'm prepared to prove it right now in front of everyone here." Victoria found herself moving before she could think, descending the staircase with her red dress flowing behind her like a banner. She pushed through the crowd, ignoring the stares and the whispers, until she stood face to face face with this impossible man. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the sleepless nights written in the shadows beneath them. She could see the calluses on his hand, the evidence of years of hard physical labor. But she could also see something else. She could see the fierce intelligence burning behind his gaze, the absolute certainty of someone who had spent countless hours wrestling with an impossible problem and had finally miraculously won. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "You're serious? This isn't some kind of elaborate prank?" Marcus met her eyes and something passed between them, a current of recognition that made her skin tingle. "I've spent 5 years on this problem," he said quietly, meant only for her. 5 years of every spare moment, every lunch break, every night after work. I've filled 3 notebooks with failed attempts. I've taught myself advanced calculus and abstract algebra from library book. 3 weeks ago at 2 in the morning I finally saw it. The pattern everyone else missed. The elegant simplicity hiding in plain sight. Victoria felt her world tilting. She had spent her entire adult life surrounded by arrogant men who claimed genius they didn't possess. She'd learned to spot frauds and pretenders from a mile away. But this man, this mechanic with chalk dust on his fingers and grease under his nails, was different. He wasn't boasting. He wasn't performing. He was simply stating a fact with the quiet confidence of someone who had done the impossible. Her father's voice shattered the moment. "Fine," Edmund Harrington said, his tone sharp with challenge. "Prove it. There's a library in the East Wing with a blackboard. You'll have 1 hour to present your solution. We'll have professors from the university verify your work. And when you fail, as I know you will, you'll be escorted off my property and charged with trespassing." Marcus nodded once, his expression never changing. 1 hour is all I need." The crowd began to move, a living tide of expensive perfume and polished shoes, all flowing toward the East Wing. Victoria found herself caught in the current, her mind racing. This was madness. This couldn't be happening. And yet, as she glanced back at Marcus's Chun, at the way he carried himself with such quiet determination, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt hope, and terrifyingly impossibly beneath the hope was something else entirely. Something that felt dangerously close to recognition, as if some part of her soul had been waiting for this exact moment, for this exact man for her entire life. The library doors opened and the stage was set. The next hour would change everything. The Harrington Library was exactly what one would expect from a man who measured his wealth in billions. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves lined every wall, filled with leather-bound first editions that had probably never been opened. A massive crystal chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting golden light across the Persian rugs and antique furniture. At the far end of the room stood an enormous blackboard, the kind you'd find in a university lecture hall, installed specifically for Edmund Harrington's occasional mathematical musings. It was a showpiece, like everything else in his life, meant to demonstrate that even his hobbies operated on a grand scale. Victoria watched as Marcus Chun walked toward the blackboard with the steady gait of a man approaching an execution. The crowd had followed them in, filling every available space, perching on leather armchairs and leaning against bookshelves. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation and barely concealed mockery. She could hear the whispered bets being placed, the cruel speculation about how quickly the mechanic would be exposed as a fraud. Her father stood front and center, his arms crossed, his expression carved from stone. Beside him were 3 professors from the university, men her father kept on retainer for moments exactly like this. They looked bored, as if they'd already decided this was a waste of their time. Marcus reached the blackboard and turned to face the crowd. For a moment he just stood there, his dark eyes scanning the sea of hostile faces. Victoria saw something flicker across his expression. Not fear exactly, but a deep weariness, as if he'd known this would be hard but had underestimated just how hard. Then his gaze found hers in the crowd, and something in him seemed to settle. He picked up a piece of chalk, rolled it between his fingers once, and began to write. The first line of symbols appeared on the board in clean, precise handwriting. Victoria leaned forward, her trained eye immediately recognizing the opening of the Harrington equation. It was deceptively simple at first glance, a seemingly straightforward problem in differential calculus, but hidden within it were layers of complexity, recursive functions that folded back on themselves, discontinuities that appeared without warning, and a boundary condition that seemed to contradict the initial premises. Mathematicians had been trying to solve it for a decade. Some claimed it was unsolvable, that her father had made an error in the original formulation. Others insisted the solution existed but required entirely new mathematical frameworks to discover. Marcus worked in silence, the only sound in the room the soft scratch of chalk on slate. He wrote quickly but methodically, each symbol flowing into the next with a fluidity that spoke of absolute mastery. Victoria found herself holding her breath. She'd seen enough failed attempts to know the common pitfalls, the places where even brilliant minds went astray. There was a particular step in the middle, a transformation that seemed to require impossible knowledge about the behavior of certain infinite series. Everyone who had tried to solve the equation had stumbled there, had made assumptions that later proved false. Marcus reached that critical juncture and paused. The room seemed to collectively lean forward. Victoria could see her father's eyes narrowing, could see the professors exchanging glances that said, "Here it comes." Here's where he fails. But Marcus didn't fail. Instead, he did something Victoria had never seen before. He took 2 steps back from the board and wrote a completely separate equation off to the side, something that appeared to have nothing to do with the original problem. It was a strange, almost whimsical expression involving imaginary numbers and a peculiar geometric series. "What is this?" one of the professors interrupted, his voice sharp with impatience. "This is completely unrelated to the Harrington equation. You're wasting our time." Marcus turned to face him, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried an authority that silenced the room. "It's not unrelated. It's the key everyone missed. The Harrington equation can't be solved directly because it's asking the wrong question. You have to transform the entire framework first. Shift the dimensional space you're working in. This side equation," he gestured to what he'd written, "is the bridge." He turned back to the board and began to work with renewed intensity. Victoria watched, her mind racing to follow his logic. She had studied this equation for years, had memorized every nuance and subtlety, and now, watching Marcus's work, she felt like she was seeing it for the first time. He was right. The transformation he was performing was brilliant, utterly unexpected, but brilliant. He was essentially turning the problem inside out, revealing a hidden symmetry that had been invisible until now. The professors were no longer bored. They had moved closer to the board, their expressions shifting from skepticism to confusion to something that looked dangerously like awe. One of them, an elderly man named Professor Whitmore, who had actually collaborated with Edmund Harrington on the original theorem, pulled out his phone and began frantically typing notes. Marcus worked for another 20 minutes, covering the massive blackboard with increasingly complex mathematics. Victoria could feel the energy in the room changing. The mocking whispers had died away, replaced by a tense, focused silence, and then Marcus wrote the final line. It was simple, almost absurdly so after the complexity of what had come before. A single expression, elegant and complete. He set down the chalk, wiped his hands on his jumpsuit, and stepped back from the board. "The answer's pi over 4. He said simply. "Exactly pi over 4. The silence that followed was absolute. Professor Whitmore was staring at the blackboard with his mouth slightly open, his phone forgotten in his hand. The other professors were frantically checking Marcus's work, tracing each step with their fingers, searching desperately for an error they couldn't find. Victoria felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, though she couldn't have said whether they were tears of joy or fear or some complex mixture of both. He had done it. This impossible man, this mechanic who taught himself advanced mathematics from library books, had solved a problem that had defeated the greatest minds in the world. Her father's face had gone pale. Edmund Harrington was not a man accustomed to being wrong, and certainly not accustomed to being bested by someone he considered beneath him. He strode forward, pushing past the professors, and began examining the blackboard himself. Victoria watched as his eyes moved across the lines of symbols, watched as comprehension dawned, and with it, a rage so profound it made the air feel dangerous. "This is impossible," Edmund said, his voice low and venomous. "Where did you really get this? Who helped you? There's no way a mechanic could have done this alone." Marcus met his gaze without flinching. "I worked alone, sir. 5 years of nights and weekends. The Henderson's auto repair shop has a small office in the back. After closing time, it was mine. I used it to teach myself everything I needed to know." Edmund turned to the professors, his expression desperate. "Well, is it correct?" Professor Whitmore cleared his throat. His hand was trembling slightly as he gestured to the blackboard. "It's not just correct, Edmund. It's elegant. The transformation he used, this dimensional shift, it's completely novel. I've never seen anything like it. This solution doesn't just answer your equation. It opens up entirely new avenues of mathematical research. This is..." He paused, searching for words. "This is the kind of work that wins awards. Major awards." The room erupted into chaos. People were talking over each other, some celebrating, some arguing, some simply standing in shocked silence. Victoria couldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, staring at Marcus Chun, at this man who had just appended her entire life with a piece of chalk and an impossible dream. He was looking back at her, and in his eyes she saw not triumph, but something softer, something almost apologetic. Her father's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Everyone out. Now, this is a private family matter." The crowd began to disperse, though slowly, reluctantly, everyone desperate to see what would happen next. The professors were the last to leave, Whitmore pausing at the door to give Marcus one last lingering look of admiration before stepping into the hallway. And then it was just the 3 of them. Victoria, her father, and Marcus Chun standing in a library filled with $10 million worth of books and a blackboard covered in proof of an impossible dream. Edmund Harrington's voice, when he finally spoke, was colder than Victoria had ever heard it. "You may have solved the equation, but if you think for 1 second that I'm going to honor that ridiculous promise, you're insane. My daughter is not a prize to be won." That announcement was a publicity stunt, nothing more. "You'll leave my home now and we'll forget this ever happened." Marcus nodded slowly, as if he'd expected exactly this response. "I understand, sir. And you're right, your daughter isn't a prize. She's a person, and she deserves to make her own choices. That's why I'm not here to claim her. I'm here to ask her directly if she'd be willing to have dinner with me. One meal, that's all. No obligations, no grand gestures. Just two people sharing a conversation. He turned to Victoria, and for the first time since walking into the ballroom, he smiled. It transformed his face, softened the hard edges carved by years of exhausting labor. Miss Harrington, he said, his voice gentle, I know this is strange. I know I'm not what you expected, but I saw your father's challenge years ago, and I saw your picture. And I read about your work in mathematics and philosophy, and I thought, here is someone who would understand. Someone who knows what it's like to love something beautiful and impossible. So I'm asking not as someone claiming a prize, but as someone who would very much like to know you. Would you have dinner with me? Victoria looked at her father, at his furious, desperate face. She looked at Marcus, at his tired eyes and hopeful smile, and she thought about the last 10 years of her life, of the endless parade of men who saw her as an achievement to unlock, of the suffocating weight of her father's expectations, of the loneliness that had become her constant companion. She thought about the courage it must have taken for this man to walk into a ballroom full of people who despised him, to stand at that blackboard and expose his heart's work to ruthless scrutiny. She thought about the 5 years of nights and weekends, the library books and the notebooks filled with failed attempts. She thought about a man who could have asked for money, for recognition, for anything, but who had asked only for a chance to know her. She took a step forward, her red dress whispering against the floor, and looked Marcus's Chun directly in the eyes. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong and free. I'll have dinner with you. The aftermath of that single word was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. Edmund Harrington's face cycled through a spectrum of emotions, disbelief, fury, and finally something that looked almost like grief. He opened his mouth to speak, closed it, then turned on his heel and walked out of the library without another word. The heavy oak door slammed behind him with a finality that made the chandelier crystals tremble. Victoria stood perfectly still, listening to his footsteps echo down the marble hallway, fading into silence. She had just chosen a stranger over her father. The weight of that choice should have crushed her. Instead, she felt lighter than she had in years. Marcus was watching her with an expression of mingled concern and wonder. Are you okay? He asked softly. I didn't mean to cause trouble between you and your father. I can leave if you want. We don't have to do this. Victoria turned to face him fully, and something about his earnest worry made her laugh, a short, slightly hysterical sound that surprised them both. You just solved an impossible equation, walked into a room full of people who wanted you to fail, stood up to one of the most powerful men in the country, and now you're apologizing. She shook her head, still smiling. No, Marcus Chun, you're not leaving, not yet. She glanced down at her elaborate gown, at the red silk and the designer heels that were already making her feet ache. But I'm going to need to change. This dress is gorgeous, but it's not exactly dinner attire. Give me 20 minutes? Marcus nodded, looking slightly dazed, as if he couldn't quite believe this was happening. His eyes traveled around the opulent library, taking in the first editions and the Persian rugs, the world of wealth that was so foreign to his own. I'll wait here, he said. Take your time. Victoria made her way upstairs to her private suite, her mind spinning. She could hear the muffled sounds of the gala continuing below, the orchestra playing, the guests gossiping about the evening's dramatic turn. By tomorrow morning, this story would be everywhere. The billionaire's daughter and the mechanic who solved the impossible equation. She could already imagine the headlines, the social media posts, the endless speculation. Her father's carefully cultivated image would take a hit, and he would never forgive her for that. She stripped off the red gown and stood in her closet, surrounded by thousands of dollars worth of designer clothes, and felt paralyzed by choice. What did one wear to dinner with a man who had just changed your life? Everything felt wrong, too formal or too casual, too desperate or too indifferent. Finally, she reached for a simple navy dress, elegant but understated, and a pair of comfortable flats. She let down her hair from its elaborate updo, washed off the heavy gala makeup, and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked younger somehow, less armored. She looked real. When she returned to the library, Marcus was standing at the blackboard, his hand hovering over the chalk as if he wanted to add something but didn't dare. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and his face lit up in a way that made her heart skip. You look beautiful, he said, then immediately looked embarrassed. I mean, you looked beautiful before too, but now you look, he struggled for words, like yourself. It was exactly the right thing to say. Victoria felt warmth spreading through her chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name but wanted to hold on to forever. Thank you, she said. So where are you taking me to dinner? I should warn you, my father probably has spies at every 5-star restaurant in the city by now. Marcus smiled, a mischievous glint in his eye. I was thinking somewhere a little less conventional, if you're willing to trust me. She thought about the man who had spent 5 years teaching himself advanced mathematics in the back room of an auto repair shop. The man who had walked into her father's gala in a grease-stained jumpsuit and solved the unsolvable. I think you've earned a little trust, she said. They slipped out through a side entrance, avoiding the main hallways where the gala was still in full swing. Marcus led her to a battered pickup truck parked in the service area, a vehicle so covered in dents and primer spots that it looked like it might not survive the journey. He opened the passenger door for her with exaggerated chivalry. "Your chariot awaits, my lady." Victoria climbed in, her designer dress incongruous against the worn fabric seats. The interior smelled like motor oil and old coffee, and there was a stack of math textbooks on the floor by her feet. She picked one up, flipping through pages filled with handwritten notes in the margins. Complex proofs worked out in tiny, meticulous script. "This is what 5 years looks like," she murmured. Marcus started the engine, which coughed and rattled before settling into a rough idle. "Yeah," he said, glancing at the books. "I couldn't afford courses, so I taught myself. The library became my university. Khan Academy videos on my phone during lunch breaks. Online forums where I could ask questions without anyone knowing who I was." He pulled out of the estate's service drive, the truck bouncing over a pothole. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. They drove through the city as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Marcus navigated through neighborhoods that grew progressively less affluent. Away from the gleaming downtown towers toward areas where the buildings were older, the streets narrower, the people more real. Victoria watched the city transform through the truck's dirty windshield and felt like she was seeing her hometown for the first time. Finally, Marcus pulled up in front of a small, nondescript building with a faded sign that read, "Chun's Noodle House." He killed the engine and turned to her with a slightly sheepish expression. "My mom's restaurant. I know it's not what you're used to, but the food is incredible. And more importantly, it's the only place in the city where I can guarantee your father's spies won't be waiting." Victoria looked at the humble restaurant, at the paper lanterns hanging in the window and the family photos visible through the glass. Something in her chest tightened with emotion. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. The interior was small and warm, with mismatched tables and chairs that spoke of decades of use. The walls were covered in faded photographs and children's drawings, a shrine to family and community. An elderly woman with silver-streaked hair looked up from behind the counter, her eyes widening when she saw Marcus. She launched into rapid Cantonese, her voice rising with each word, gesturing emphatically. Victoria didn't need a translation to understand the general sentiment. "Where have you been? You missed dinner again. You worked too hard." Marcus responded in the same language, his tone apologetic and affectionate. Then he gestured to Victoria. "Mom, this is Victoria. Victoria, this is my mother, Lin Chun." Lin's sharp eyes swept over Victoria, taking in the expensive dress and the obvious signs of wealth. Her expression was unreadable. She said something else in Cantonese, and Marcus laughed, a real, unguarded sound. He turned to Victoria. "She says you're too skinny and too pale. She's going to feed you properly. It's the highest compliment she can give." They sat at a corner table, and Lynn disappeared into the kitchen without taking an order. The food began arriving minutes later, plate after plate of steaming dumplings, fragrant noodles, vegetables prepared in ways Victoria had never experienced. Lynn hovered nearby, watching critically as they ate, occasionally barking comments in Cantonese that made Marcus grin. "This is incredible," Victoria said around a mouthful of some kind of dumpling that was possibly the best thing she'd ever tasted. "Does she cook everything herself?" Marcus nodded. "Every day for the last 30 years. This restaurant is her life." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "It's also why I needed to solve your father's equation. The prize money, I mean. Before I knew there was no prize money." Victoria set down her chopsticks. "Tell me." He looked down at his plate, gathering his thoughts. "My mom came to this country with nothing. She built this place from the ground up, worked 16-hour days to put me through school. I got a scholarship to study engineering, but then she got sick. Cancer. The treatment ate through everything we had. I dropped out to work to help pay the bills. She survived, thank God. But the debt," he shook his head. "Medical bills, business loans she took out to keep the restaurant going while she couldn't work. We're drowning in it." He met her eyes, and she saw the exhaustion there, the years of carrying impossible weight. "I started working at Henderson's Auto Repair because the pay was decent and I could pick up overtime, but it wasn't enough. I needed something more. Then I saw your father's announcement, the prize for solving the equation, $10 million. It would change everything. It would save my mom's restaurant, pay off her medical bills, give her the retirement she deserved. So I started studying. Every free moment I had." Victoria felt tears burning in her eyes. "You did all of that, learned all of that just to help your mother?" Marcus shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the emotion in her voice. "She gave me everything. It's my turn to give something back." He smiled slightly. "Though I'll admit, about a year in, my motivation started to shift. I read about you, watched interviews you'd given. You weren't just some spoiled rich girl. You were brilliant, passionate about mathematics and philosophy, asking big questions about the nature of reality. And I started to think maybe the real prize wasn't the money. Maybe it was the chance to meet someone who could understand why I was doing this. Why the beauty of an elegant proof could matter as much as the practical application." Lynn returned with more food, eyeing them both with the knowing look of a mother who recognized something developing. She said something in Cantonese, pointed at Victoria, then at Marcus, and walked away chuckling. "What did she say?" Victoria asked. Marcus's ears turned slightly red. "She said you have kind eyes and that I should have brought you here months ago. She also said if I let you get away, she's disowning me." Victoria laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "I like her. She likes you too," Marcus said softly. "I can tell. She only threatens disownment for the important thing." They ate and talked for hours, the restaurant emptying around them as closing time approached. Victoria told him about growing up in her father's shadow, about the pressure to be perfect, the loneliness of being seen as a symbol rather than a person. Marcus told her about teaching himself calculus from library books, about the moment he'd finally understood the transformation that made the Harrington equation solvable, about the fear he'd felt walking into that ballroom. When Lynn finally shooed them out, insisting she needed to close up, it was past midnight. They stood on the sidewalk under the paper lanterns, neither quite ready for the night to end. Marcus walked Victoria back to his truck, but instead of opening the door, he just stood there, his hands in his pockets. "I should probably get you home," he said, though his voice was reluctant. Victoria looked at him, at this extraordinary man who had upended her carefully ordered world in the space of a single evening. "Probably," she agreed. "But first I want you to know something. Tonight, this dinner with your mother, this conversation, it's the most real thing I've experienced in years, maybe in my entire life, so thank you. For solving the equation, yes, but more for showing me there's a world beyond the one I've been trapped in." Marcus reached out and gently took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. "The equation was just the beginning, Victoria. I think we're solving something much more complicated now." She squeezed his hand, feeling the truth of his words settle into her bones. "Then let's figure it out together." The storm hit Victoria's life with the force of a Category 5 hurricane. By the time Marcus dropped her off at her downtown apartment, the one she kept away from the family estate for the illusion of independence, the story had already gone viral. Her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. Twitter was on fire with the hashtag Billionaire Math Challenge. News sites had already published breathless articles with headlines like "Mechanic solves impossible equation," "Wins billionaire's daughter in modern fairy tale," or "Publicity stunt." There were photos of Marcus at the blackboard, somehow captured by guests who had been recording on their phone. There were photos of her in the red dress, her face showing a mixture of shock and something the internet was already calling love at first sight. She silenced her phone and tried to sleep, but her mind wouldn't stop replaying the evening. The way Marcus had looked at that blackboard with absolute focus, the way his mother had fussed over her food, the way his hand had felt in hers, rough and real and right. She had spent her entire life in a world of polish and performance, where every interaction was calculated, every relationship transactional. Marcus was different. He was authentic in a way that felt almost dangerous, like looking directly at the sun after years of living in shadows. The next morning she woke to someone pounding on her door. She stumbled out of bed, still in the oversized t-shirt she slept in, and peered through the peephole. Her father stood there, his face rigid with barely controlled fury. She considered not opening the door, considered pretending she wasn't home. But Edmund Harrington was not a man who accepted closed doors. He would simply have the building manager let him in. She opened the door. He swept past her into the apartment without waiting for an invitation, his expensive suit and cologne overwhelming her small living space. "Have you seen the news?" he demanded, turning to face her with his phone outstretched. "Have you seen what you've done to this family's reputation?" Victoria closed the door and crossed her arms. "Good morning to you too, Father." "Don't," he snapped. "Don't you dare act like this is a normal morning. You humiliated me in front of 300 guests. You chose some nobody, some grease monkey over your own family. Do you have any idea what this looks like?" "It looks like I made a choice," Victoria said, her voice calm despite the anger building in her chest. "It looks like I finally did something for myself instead of performing for your cameras." Edmund's face went red. "This is not about cameras. This is about judgment. This is about understanding your place in the world. That man, that Marcus Chun, he's using you. He saw an opportunity and he took it. And you were foolish enough to fall for it. He solved your equation," Victoria said, her voice rising. "He did something no one else in the world could do. And instead of acknowledging his brilliance, you're dismissing him because he doesn't come from money. That says far more about you than it does about him." Her father stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "I built an empire from nothing. I earned every dollar through intelligence and hard work. I will not have some opportunist attach himself to my daughter like a parasite. You will not see him again. You will issue a statement saying that last night was a momentary lapse in judgment brought on by the shock of the evening, and then you will move on with your life." Victoria felt something crystallize inside her, a clarity she'd been moving toward for years but had never quite reached until this moment. "No," she said simply. Edmund blinked. "What did you say?" "I said no. I'm 25 years old, Father. I have 2 degrees from Cambridge. I run the research division of your foundation. I am not a child you can order around anymore. I'm going to see Marcus again. I'm going to get to know him. And if you can't accept that, then maybe you need to examine why your love for me comes with so many conditions attached." The silence that followed was terrible. Edmund Harrington stared at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time, and not liking what he saw. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold as winter ice. "If you continue down this path, there will be consequences. I will not support this relationship. I will not welcome him into our family. And if you choose him over your responsibilities here, over the foundation, over everything I've built for you, then you choose to do so alone. Do you understand me? Victoria felt tears burning in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I understand perfectly, she said. You've made yourself very clear. Her father nodded once, a sharp final gesture, then turned and walked out of her apartment. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow felt louder than if he had slammed it. Victoria stood in her living room trembling and realized she had just crossed a bridge and burned it behind her. There was no going back now. She showered, dressed, and forced herself to eat breakfast even though her stomach was in knots. Then she called the one person she trusted to tell her the truth. Her best friend Rachel, who worked as a prosecutor and had no patience for sentiment or bullshit. Rachel answered on the second ring. I've been waiting for your call, Rachel said without preamble. I saw the videos. Everyone saw the videos. Girl, what the hell did you do? Victoria laughed weakly. I think I just blew up my entire life. Okay, first question. Is he real? The mechanic who solved the impossible math problem. Is he legitimately brilliant, or is this some kind of elaborate con? He's real, Victoria said without hesitation. Rachel, I watched him work. I've studied that equation for years. What he did was beyond brilliant. It was revolutionary. The second question, and this is the important one. Rachel's voice softened. Do you like him? Separate from the drama and the publicity and the whole fairy tale aspect, do you actually like this guy? Victoria thought about Marcus's tired eyes and gentle smile. She thought about his mother's restaurant and the way he'd talked about 5 years of late nights and library books. She thought about the way her hand had felt in his. Yes, she said quietly, I really do. Then screw your father, Rachel said bluntly. I've been watching you suffocate in that world for years. Maybe this is exactly what you need. Chaos. A little reality. A guy who doesn't care about your last name or your trust fund. Victoria felt something loosen in her chest. You really think so? I think you've spent your whole life doing what was expected. Maybe it's time to do what makes you happy. Rachel paused. Be careful, okay? The internet is ruthless, and you're about to be in the center of a media firestorm. Some people will love your story, others will tear you apart. Make sure you're ready for that. They talked for another hour, Rachel helping Victoria strategize how to handle the inevitable media attention. By the time she hung up, Victoria felt steadier, more certain of her choice. She picked up her phone and scrolled through the thousands of notifications until she found what she was looking for. A text message from an unknown number that had come in at 7 that morning. It read simply, I hope last night was as real for you as it was for me. If you want to see me again, I'll be at the shop today. No pressure, Marcus. Victoria smiled, her first genuine smile since her father had shown up at her door. She grabbed her keys and headed out, ignoring the remaining notifications. The think pieces about class and privilege, the speculation about her motives, the cruel comments about gold diggers and foolish heiresses. None of it mattered. What mattered was a man who had spent 5 years chasing an impossible dream, not for glory or recognition, but to save his mother's restaurant. Henderson's Auto Repair was a squat, greasy building on the edge of an industrial district. The parking lot was cracked concrete, stained with decades of oil and transmission fluid. A faded sign advertised tire rotations and brake jobs. It was about as far from the Harrington estate as a place could be, both in distance and in spirit. Victoria parked her car, a sleek BMW that looked absurdly out of place, and walked toward the open garage bay. She heard Marcus before she saw him, his voice echoing from underneath a lifted Honda, explaining something about a transmission seal to a customer. She waited, watching his legs stick out from under the car, his worn work boots and oil-stained jeans. After a moment, he rolled out on a creeper, a streak of grease across his forehead, and froze when he saw her standing there. He got to his feet quickly, wiping his hands on a red shop rag. Victoria, he said, his voice filled with surprise and pleasure. You came. She nodded, suddenly feeling shy. I got your text. I wanted to see you. To thank you properly for last night, and to apologize for my father's behavior. Marcus shook his head. You don't need to apologize for him. He gestured around the shop at the tools and the oil stains and the calendar on the wall featuring vintage cars. This is my world. I'm not surprised he's not thrilled about it. A gruff voice called out from the office. Chun, you gonna stand there making eyes at your girl, or are you gonna finish that transmission? An older man appeared in the doorway, heavy-set with a gray beard and shrewd eyes. He looked Victoria up and down, taking in her expensive clothes and her out-of-place presence. So you're the billionaire's daughter, the one my best mechanic sacrificed 5 years of his life. Victoria felt herself flushing. Yes, that's me, the man grunted. Name's Henderson. I own this dump. He walked over, extending a grease-stained hand. Marcus here's the best worker I've ever had. Showed up 6 years ago, needed a job, been here ever since. Never late, never complains. Works harder than men twice his size. So here's what I want to know. You gonna break his heart, or is this the real deal? The directness of the question caught Victoria off guard. Marcus looked mortified. Boss, you can't just... I can ask whatever I want, Henderson interrupted. This boy's been living like a monk, working himself to death to solve some impossible math problem, all for a chance to meet you. He deserves to know if you're serious or if you're just slumming it for the thrill. Victoria met Henderson's gaze steadily. She thought about her father's ultimatum, about the bridge she'd burned that morning. I'm serious, she said quietly. More serious than I've ever been about anything. Henderson studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Good, Chun. Take your lunch break. Show this girl where you've been spending your nights for the past 5 years. Let her see what this really cost you." Marcus looked at Victoria, a question in his eyes. She nodded. He led her through the shop, past the lifts and the tool chest, to a small door at the back. Beyond it was a tiny office, barely large enough for a desk and a chair, but the walls were covered, absolutely covered, with paper. Hundreds of sheets filled with mathematical notation, proofs and counterproofs, failed attempts and dead ends. 3 notebooks sat on the desk, their covers worn from constant use. "This is it," Marcus said softly. "This is where it happened. 5 years of my life, compressed into this 8x10 room." Victoria walked slowly around the space, reading the papers, seeing the evolution of his thinking. She could trace his learning curve in the handwriting, the early attempts crude and uncertain, gradually becoming more sophisticated, more confident. She saw the moments of breakthrough, the places where he'd written yes in all capitals surrounded by exclamation points. She saw the moments of despair, the crumpled papers on the floor, the places where he'd scratched out entire pages of work. And then she saw something else. On the wall beside the desk, there was a small photo, printed from the internet on regular copy paper and thumbtacked to the plaster. It was a picture of her from a lecture she'd given at Cambridge 2 years earlier, talking about the philosophical implications of Gödel's incompleteness theorem. She was gesturing emphatically, her face animated with passion for the subject. Underneath the photo in Marcus's handwriting were the words, "For her, keep going." Victoria felt tears spilling down her cheeks. She turned to Marcus, who was watching her with an expression of such naked vulnerability it made her heart ache. "You kept my picture on your wall," she whispered. "For 2 years." He nodded slowly. "You were my North Star. When the work got too hard, when I wanted to give up, I would look at that picture and remember why I started. You represented everything I was working toward. Intelligence, passion, someone who would understand what all of this meant." Victoria crossed the small space between them and kissed him. It was different from their first kiss the night before, less hesitant, more certain. His arms came around her and she felt the solid reality of him, the strength in his shoulders from years of physical labor, the gentleness in the way he held her as if she was something precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "I know this is crazy," he said quietly. "I know we barely know each other, but Victoria, I feel like I've been looking for you my entire life, and now that I've found you, I'm not letting go without a fight." She smiled through her tears. "Good," she said, "because my father just disowned me this morning. I'm probably going to be a social pariah by this afternoon, and I'm going to need someone who knows how to solve impossible problems." Marcus pulled back slightly, his eyes widening. "He what?" "Long story," Victoria said. "The short version is I chose you, and that choice came with consequences, but I don't regret it. Not for a second." He searched her face, seeing the truth there, and something in his expression shifted from wonder to fierce determination. "Then we face it together," he said. "Whatever comes, we face it together. Your father, the media, all of it. You're not alone in this, Victoria. Not anymore." She kissed him again, softer this time, a promise and a benediction. Around them, the tiny office was silent except for the distant sounds of the shop, the clanging of tools and the rumble of engines. On the wall, hundreds of pages of mathematical proofs bore witness to 5 years of impossible dedication. And in that moment, standing in a grease-stained office on the wrong side of town, Victoria Harrington had never felt more at home in her entire life. The media circus descended with the subtlety of a bombing raid. By the end of the week, Victoria and Marcus couldn't walk down the street without being photographed. News vans camped outside Henderson's auto repair. Reporters shouted questions at them from behind police barricades. The story had everything the public craved: wealth and poverty, privilege and hard work, a brilliant underdog and an impossible challenge. It was a modern fairy tale and the world couldn't get enough of it. The coverage split along predictable lines. Some outlets celebrated the romance, calling Marcus a genius and Victoria brave for defying her father. Others were crueler, questioning Marcus's motives and painting Victoria as a naive heiress being manipulated by a clever opportunist. The comments sections were battlegrounds where strangers fought viciously over people they'd never met, projecting their own beliefs about class and love and ambition onto two people just trying to navigate an impossible situation. Victoria tried to ignore it, but it was everywhere. Her social media accounts were flooded with messages, some supportive, many hostile. Someone created a hashtag called Team Marcus versus Team Edmund that trended for 3 days straight. A gossip site published a deep dive into Marcus's financial history, complete with his mother's medical bills and business debts, framing him as desperate and calculating. Another site published Victoria's dating history, interviewing ex-boyfriends who claimed she'd always been looking for a way to rebel against her father. The worst part was watching Marcus suffer through it. He wasn't built for this kind of scrutiny. He was a private person, someone who'd spent 5 years working in quiet obscurity, and suddenly his entire life was being dissected by millions of strangers. She watched him grow quieter, more withdrawn. He stopped checking his phone. He arrived at work earlier and stayed later, burying himself in the familiar comfort of engines and transmissions, tasked with clear problems and definite solutions. Victoria tried to reach him through the walls he was building, but she could feel him slipping away. They'd been seeing each other for 2 weeks. Stolen moments between work shifts and media ambushes, and instead of growing closer, they were being pulled apart by the weight of the world's attention. It came to a head on a rainy Thursday evening when she showed up at the shop after closing time to find Marcus sitting alone in his office, staring at the wall of mathematical proofs. She knocked softly on the doorframe. He looked up and she saw exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "Hey," she said gently. "Henderson let me in. I brought dinner." She held up a bag from his mother's restaurant. Marcus managed a weak smile. "You didn't have to do that. I wanted to." She came in, set the food on the desk, and sat down in the only chair. "Talk to me, Marcus. Tell me what's going on in your head." He was quiet for a long time, his gaze drifting back to the wall. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and strained. "I saw the article today. The one about my mom's debts, about how I must have been desperate for money. They made it sound like everything I did was calculated, like solving the equation was just a con job." Victoria felt anger flare in her chest. "You know that's not true. Anyone who looks at this room at 5 years of work knows that's not true." "Do I?" Marcus turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Doubt. "Because here's the thing, Victoria, I did need the money. That wasn't a lie. I did spend 5 years working toward a prize I thought would save my mother's restaurant. And yes, along the way I started to care about meeting you, about the challenge itself, but the foundation of it was financial desperation. So maybe they're not entirely wrong." Victoria stood up, her hands clenched into fists. "Don't do this. Don't let them rewrite your story. You solved that equation because you're brilliant, because you saw a challenge and refused to quit. The money was part of it, yes, but it wasn't all of it. And even if it was, that wouldn't make you a con artist. It would make you a devoted son trying to help his mother. There's nothing shameful in that." Marcus shook his head. "You don't understand. I'm dragging you down. Your father was right. I'm an anchor around your neck. You've lost your family, your place in society, all because I walked into that ballroom and couldn't leave well enough alone." Victoria felt tears burning in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "You want to know what I've lost? I've lost a father who only loved me conditionally. I've lost a social circle that valued my last name more than my personhood. I've lost a life that was suffocating me slowly every single day. And you know what I've gained?" She moved closer to him, cupping his face in her hand. "I've gained someone who sees me for who I actually am, someone who challenges me intellectually and emotionally, someone who spent 5 years chasing an impossible dream because he believed in something beyond himself. That's not an anchor, Marcus. That's a life raft." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "What if I can't handle the cameras, the scrutiny, the constant judgment? What if I'm not strong enough? Then we'll figure it out together," Victoria said firmly. "That's what you told me, remember? Whatever comes, we face it together." "I meant it then, and I mean it now. But Marcus, I need you to be honest with me. Do you want this? Do you want us? Because if you're having doubts, if this is too much, I need to know now." He opened his eyes and she saw the answer there before he spoke. "I want this more than I've ever wanted anything. You terrify me, Victoria Harrington. The intensity of what I feel for you after just 2 weeks terrifies me. But I can't imagine going back to my life before you. I can't imagine walking away." "Then don't," she whispered. "Don't let them win. Don't let the noise drown out what's real between us." He pulled her close and they held each other in the small office while the rain drummed against the roof. Outside, the world raged and judged and speculated. Inside, two people who had found each other against impossible odds held on tight and refused to let go. The next morning, Victoria made a decision. If they were going to survive this, they needed to control their own narrative. She called Rachel, who arrived at her apartment within the hour with coffee and a legal pad. "They're eating you alive because you're not fighting back," Rachel said, settling onto the couch. "You need to tell your story before someone else tells it for you." Victoria nodded. "I was thinking the same thing. But how? A press release feels cold. An interview feels performative." Rachel tapped her pen against the pad thoughtfully. "What about something more personal? A video, maybe? Just you talking directly to camera. No reporters, no spin, just your truth." They worked on it all morning, Victoria writing and rewriting her statement until every word felt exactly right. By noon, she had it memorized. Rachel set up her phone on a tripod, adjusted the lighting, and hit record. Victoria took a deep breath and began to speak. "My name's Victoria Harrington, and I want to tell you a story. Not the story you've been reading in the tabloids, but the real one. The one about a woman who spent her whole life being told her value was tied to her last name and her bank account. The one about a man who taught himself advanced mathematics in the back room of an auto repair shop because he wanted to help his mother. The one about two people who found each other in the most unlikely way and decided that what they'd found was worth fighting for." She spoke for 10 minutes, her voice clear and unwavering. She talked about her father's conditional love, about the loneliness of privilege, about watching Marcus solve an impossible equation and seeing not just brilliance but years of dedication and sacrifice. She talked about the choice she'd made and why she didn't regret it. She talked about falling in love with someone who saw her as a person, not a prize. And she looked directly into the camera when she said, "If you think Marcus Chun is using me, you don't understand what real connection looks like. He didn't change my life because he wanted something from me. He changed my life because he reminded me that I could choose my own path. That's not manipulation, that's liberation." When she finished, Rachel wiped tears from her eyes. Girl, that was perfect. You ready for the fallout? Victoria thought about Marcus in his small office surrounded by 5 years of impossible work. She thought about his mother's restaurant and the warmth she'd felt eating dumplings at that mismatched table. She thought about her father's cold ultimatum and the bridge she'd burned. They posted the video on Victoria's social media accounts and watched it spread like wildfire. Within an hour, it had 1 million views. Within 3 hours, 5 million. The comments section became a war zone, but something was shifting. More and more people were expressing support, sharing their own stories of choosing love over family approval, of finding connection in unexpected places. The narrative was beginning to turn. Marcus called her that evening, his voice thick with emotion. I just watched your video. Victoria, you didn't have to do that. You didn't have to put yourself out there like that for me. Yes, I did, she said softly, because you're worth it. We're worth it. And I'm tired of letting other people define our story. There was a long pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, stronger. Then let's write the next chapter together. My mom wants to meet you properly. Not just a quick introduction, but a real dinner. She wants to interrogate you, I think. Make sure you're good enough for her son. Victoria laughed, feeling lighter than she had in days. I would love that. When? Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, or something you don't mind getting soup on. She's making her special hot pot, and it's a full contact sport. Victoria smiled, warmth flooding through her. I'll be there. And Marcus, I love you. I know it's fast, and I know it's complicated, but I love you. The silence that followed was so long she thought the call had dropped. Then she heard him breathe out shakily. I love you too, he said. I've loved you since I saw that picture of you giving that lecture at Cambridge. I just didn't know if I was allowed to feel that way, Victoria whispered. We're both allowed. We get to choose this. We get to choose each other. When they hung up, Victoria sat in her apartment alone, but she didn't feel lonely. Tomorrow she would go to Lynn's restaurant and be interrogated by a woman who had crossed an ocean and built a life from nothing. She would eat hot pot and probably make a fool of herself trying to use chopsticks properly. She would sit beside Marcus and feel his hand in hers and know that whatever came next, they would face it together. The world could judge them all it wanted. They had already made their choice and they were standing by it. That was all that mattered. Victoria arrived at Shun's Noodle House the following evening wearing jeans and a simple blouse, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She'd learned from her first visit that Lynn had no patience for pretension, and showing up overdressed would be an insult to the woman's no-nonsense sensibility. Marcus met her at the door, his face lighting up when he saw her. He kissed her quickly, then whispered a warning. She's been cooking all day. That's either a very good sign or a very bad one. I honestly can't tell. The restaurant was closed to the public for the evening, but the interior was warm with golden light and the rich aroma of spices and simmering broth. Lynn emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron and an expression that could have cut glass. She looked Victoria up and down with the critical eye of a general inspecting troops, then said something in rapid Cantonese that made Marcus wince. What did she say? Victoria asked. Marcus cleared his throat. She said you're prettier in person than in the newspapers, but pretty is easy. She wants to know if you can work hard and whether you'll still be here when the cameras stop watching. Victoria met Lynn's gaze steadily and spoke directly to her, even though she knew the older woman would need Marcus to translate. Mrs. Chun, I know you have every reason to doubt me. I come from a world of privilege and excess, and your son comes from a world of sacrifice and hard work. But I want you to know that I see him. Not the story the media is telling, not the fairy tale people want to believe, but the real man. The one who spent 5 years teaching himself mathematics because he loves you and wanted to help you. The one who walks into impossible situations with quiet courage. I'm not here for the cameras or the attention. I'm here because your son makes me want to be a better person than I was raised to be. Marcus translated, his voice soft. Lynn listened, her expression unchanged. Then she gestured sharply toward the kitchen and barked something that needed no translation. Come, we cook together. Then we eat. Then we talked. The next hour was a revelation. Lynn put Victoria to work immediately, showing her how to slice vegetables with the proper technique, how to prepare the broth with the right balance of spices, how to arrange the ingredients on plates with care and precision. She corrected Victoria's knife work without mercy, grabbing her hand and repositioning her fingers with firm authority. This is wrong. Do again. Better this time. Victoria found herself sweating over a cutting board, trying desperately to meet Lynn's exacting standards. Marcus watched from a stool by the counter, a smile playing at his lips. You're doing great, he offered. She usually throws people out of her kitchen within 5 minutes. Lynn said something sharp and can't. Marcus's smile widened. He says, don't encourage you. You need to learn proper way, not easy way. By the time they sat down to eat, Victoria's hands were cramping and she had 3 minor cuts from the knife, but she felt an absurd sense of pride. The hot pot bubbled at the center of the table, surrounded by plates of prepared ingredients. Lynn ladled broth into bowls and watched critically as Victoria attempted to use chopsticks to fish out vegetables and meat. Her technique was clumsy, and twice she dropped food back into the pot, but Lynn didn't scold her. Instead, the older woman's expression softened almost imperceptibly. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the bubbling of the broth and the clink of chopsticks against bowls. Then Lynn spoke, and Marcus translated. My husband died when Marcus was 8 years old. Heart attack. Very sudden. We had nothing. No family here, no money, no help. I worked 3 jobs. I cleaned offices at night. I washed dishes at restaurants during the day. I sold vegetables at the farmer's market on weekend. Marcus wore second-hand clothes. We lived in an apartment the size of this dining, but I saved every dollar. And when I had enough, I opened this place. Victoria listened, hearing the steel in Lynn's voice even through Marcus's gentle translation. Lynn continued, I worked 16 hours every day for 20 years to make this restaurant succeed, to give my son opportunities I never had. When I got sick, when the cancer came, I thought everything I built would be destroyed. The medical bills, they were impossible. But Marcus, he dropped out of university. He took a job at the repair shop. He worked like I worked every hour he had. And when I asked him why he was always so tired, why he had notebooks full of mathematics, he said he was trying to win a prize that would save everything. She looked directly at Victoria, her dark eyes fierce and searching. He did not do this for himself. He did this for me, for this restaurant, for the life I tried to build. So when I see you, rich girl from the newspaper, I think, does she understand sacrifice? Does she understand what it means to give up everything for someone you love? Or is she playing game with my son's heart? Victoria set down her chopsticks, her own eyes stinging with tears. Mrs. Chun, I can't claim to understand your sacrifices. I grew up with every advantage, every comfort. I've never had to work 3 jobs or wonder where my next meal would come from. But I do understand what it means to be trapped in a life that's slowly suffocating you. I understand what it means to be valued for everything except who you actually are. And I understand what it means to meet someone who sees through all the noise to the person underneath. She reached across the table and took Marcus's hand. Your son didn't just solve an impossible equation. He showed me that I could be more than what my father wanted me to be. He showed me that genuine connection is worth more than all the money in the world. So yes, I'm from a different world. Yes, people will judge us and question our motives and try to tear us apart. But I'm here because I choose to be. Not because of cameras or fairy tales, but because I love your son. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the sacrifices you both have made. Lynn was silent for a long time, her face unreadable. Then she stood up, walked around the table and pulled Victoria to her feet. She studied the younger woman's face for a moment, then did something completely unexpected. She hugged her. It was fierce and brief, but unmistakable. When she pulled back, she spoke in English for the first time, her accent thick, but her words clear. You have soft hands, city girl hands, but you try hard in my kitchen. You don't complain. You don't quit. That is good. You stay with my son. You make him happy. I teach you how to cook proper Chinese food. Deal? Victoria laughed through her tears. Deal. The rest of the evening passed in a warm blur. Lynn relaxed, becoming almost playful, telling embarrassing stories about Marcus as a child, about the time he tried to cook dinner when she was sick and nearly burned down their apartment, about his terrible haircuts and his stubborn refusal to ask for help even when he desperately needed it. Marcus groaned and protested, but Victoria could see the love beneath the teasing, the unbreakable bond between mother and son. She felt privileged to be allowed into this inner circle, to see this private side of the man she loved. As they were cleaning up, Lynn's phone rang. She answered it, listened for a moment, and her expression darkened. She spoke rapidly in Cantonese, her voice rising with agitation. When she hung up, she looked at Marcus with worry etched into her features. She said something urgent, gesturing toward the front windows of the restaurant. Marcus's face went pale. What? Victoria asked, what's wrong? He walked to the window and looked out, then cursed softly. There are photographers outside, a lot of them. Someone must have tipped them off that you were here. Victoria joined him at the window. Sure enough, there were at least a dozen people with cameras clustered on the sidewalk, their flashes already starting to fire. She felt a surge of anger and violation. They couldn't even have one private evening without the world intruding. This is my fault, she said. I should have been more careful. I should have made sure no one followed me. Lynn said something sharp and Marcus translated. Mom says it's not your fault. She says these people are like rats. They find their way in everywhere. But she's worried. She doesn't want trouble for the restaurant. Victoria made a decision. I'll go out the back. Lead them away. You two stay here where it's safe. Marcus grabbed her arm. No, we go together. That's the deal, remember? We face everything together. They spent another minute strategizing, then Marcus called Henderson. The old mechanic arrived 15 minutes later in his truck, pulling into the alley behind the restaurant. The plan was simple. Henderson would drive Victoria home while Marcus stayed with his mother. They'd split up the photographer's attention and hopefully lose them in traffic. It wasn't elegant, but it was practical. Victoria hugged Lynn goodbye, receiving whispered words in Cantonese that Marcus translated as, you come back soon, practice your knife skills. Then she and Marcus slipped out the back door into the alley. Henderson's truck was waiting, engine running. They could hear the photographers out front calling questions, demanding statements. Marcus opened the passenger door for Victoria, but before she could climb in, he pulled her close and kissed her hard. A kiss full of frustration and longing and stubborn defiance. When he pulled back, his voice was rough. I hate this. I hate that we can't have a simple dinner without being hunted. I hate that my mom has to worry about photographers bothering her customers. I hate all of it. Victoria cupped his face in her hands. I know, but Marcus, tonight was perfect. Your mother accepted me. She's going to teach me to cook. That's worth a dozen photographers. That's worth everything. He rested his forehead against hers. You're sure about this? About us? Because it's only going to get harder before it gets easier. She kissed him softly. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Henderson cleared his throat from the driver's seat. Hate to break up the moment, kids, but those vultures are going to figure out there's a back door any minute now. We need to move. Victoria climbed into the truck. Marcus closed the door and stepped back. As Henderson pulled out of the alley, she turned to look through the rear window. Marcus was standing there in the dim light, his hand raised in farewell, and she felt her heart constrict with love and worry and fierce determination. They would survive this. They had to, because what they'd found was too rare, too precious to let the world destroy it. The truck turned onto the main street and Marcus disappeared from view. Victoria faced forward, already counting the hours until she could see him again. The attack came from a direction Victoria hadn't anticipated. 3 weeks after the dinner at Lynn's restaurant, Marcus received a certified letter at the auto shop. Henderson brought it to him during lunch break, his expression grim. "This looks official," he said, "and in my experience, official letters are never good news." Marcus opened it with grease-stained fingers, his eyes scanning the dense legal text. Victoria watched his face go pale as he read. "What is it?" she asked, though something in her gut already knew the answer would be bad. He handed her the letter without speaking. It was from the United States Patent and Trademark Office, informing Marcus that his solution to the Harrington equation was being challenged. Edmund Harrington had filed a claim asserting that the solution incorporated proprietary mathematical frameworks from his original theorem, frameworks that were protected intellectual property. Furthermore, Harrington was claiming that Marcus had violated the terms of the original challenge by not submitting his solution through proper channels before presenting it publicly. The letter concluded by informing Marcus that he was being sued for intellectual property theft and breach of contract. The damages being sought were $15 million. Victoria felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. This is insane. You can't steal mathematics. Mathematical proofs are public domain once they're published. Your solution is completely original. Marcus sat down heavily on a nearby toolbox. His hands were shaking. $15 million. I don't have $15,000, let alone $15 million. Your father knows that. He's trying to destroy me. Henderson, who had been reading over their shoulders, let out a string of curses that would have made a sailor blush. This is a strategic lawsuit. He's not trying to win. He's trying to bury you in legal fees until you can't afford to fight anymore. It's a classic rich man's tactic. Victoria pulled out her phone, her mind already racing through options. "I'm calling Rachel. She's a prosecutor, but she knows lawyers who handle this kind of case. We'll fight this." Marcus caught her wrist, his grip gentle but firm. "Victoria, stop. Look at me." She did and saw defeat in his eyes. "I can't let you spend your money defending me against your own father. That's exactly what he wants. He wants to turn you against each other, to make you choose between your fortune and me. And if you choose me, you'll be bankrupt before this is over." "Then we'll be bankrupt together," Victoria said fiercely. "I'm not letting him do this. I'm not letting him weaponize the legal system to punish you for loving me." But Marcus was shaking his head. "There's another option. I could withdraw the solution, publicly apologize. Say I made a mistake, that I misunderstood the terms of the challenge. If I do that, he'll probably drop the lawsuit." Victoria felt tears of rage burning in her eyes. "That would be a lie. You didn't make a mistake. You solved an impossible problem through years of brilliant work. If you withdraw it now, you're letting him steal your achievement. You're letting him win." "Maybe he should win," Marcus said quietly. "Look at what my solution has cost already. You've lost your father, your inheritance. My mom's restaurant is being harassed by photographers. Now there's a $15 million lawsuit hanging over my head. What's next, Victoria? How much more damage are we going to allow before we admit that maybe this was all a mistake?" The words hit her like a physical blow. "You think we're a mistake?" Marcus stood up and paced away from her, his shoulders tight with tension. "I think I was arrogant to believe I could solve that equation. I think I was naive to walk into your father's gala and expect anything other than disaster. And I think I've been selfish keeping you in this relationship when it's destroying your life piece by piece." Victoria felt something break inside her chest. "After everything we've been through, after everything we've said to each other, you're going to give up now." He turned to face her, and she saw tears tracking through the grease on his face. "I'm trying to protect you. Can't you see that? Your father is never going to stop. He has unlimited resources and unlimited malice. He will keep coming at us until there's nothing left, until I'm bankrupt and broken and you're left with nothing but the ruins of what your life used to be. I love you too much to watch that happen." Henderson had quietly left them alone, disappearing into the shop to give them privacy. Victoria crossed the small space between her and Marcus, taking his face in her hands and forcing him to look at her. "Listen to me very carefully. I didn't choose you because I thought it would be easy. I chose you because you're worth fighting for. My father doesn't get to decide who I love. He doesn't get to use his money and his power to control my life anymore. And he certainly doesn't get to intimidate you into giving up the most brilliant achievement of your life." "But the legal fees," Marcus started. "I have money of my own," Victoria interrupted. "Trust funds from my grandparents that my father can't touch. I've been saving for years. We'll use that to fight this lawsuit. And Marcus, we're going to win. Because the mathematics don't lie. Your solution is legitimate. And any expert will confirm that. My father is bluff. He's counting on you being too scared to call his bluff." Marcus pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "What if we lose? What if the court sides with him? What if this destroys everything? Then we'll rebuild," Victoria whispered. "Together, from nothing if we have to." But Marcus, please don't quit. Don't let him take this from you. You earned this. You deserve to be recognized for what you accomplished. They stood there in the small office, holding each other while the world tried to tear them apart. Finally, Marcus pulled back and looked at her, searching her face. You're sure? You're absolutely sure you want to go to war with your father over this? Victoria nodded. I've never been more sure of anything. The next few weeks were a blur of legal consultations and strategy sessions. Rachel connected them with a fierce intellectual property attorney named Margaret Wu, a woman who had built her career taking on wealthy bullies and winning. Margaret reviewed the case and confirmed what Victoria had suspected. Edmund Harrington's lawsuit was legally dubious at best. Mathematical proofs couldn't be copyrighted, and Marcus's solution was demonstrably original work. But the lawsuit didn't need to be legitimate to be effective. The goal was attrition, to drain their resources until they couldn't fight anymore. Margaret's strategy was aggressive. She filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that the lawsuit was frivolous and seeking sanctions against Edmund for abuse of the legal system. She also went on the offensive, giving interviews to major publications explaining the situation and framing Edmund Harrington as a wealthy bully trying to destroy a brilliant young mathematician out of spite. The media, which had been relatively sympathetic to their love story, now turned the full force of its attention on Edmund's legal tactics. The headlines were brutal. Billionaire tries to silence genius who solved his equation. Mathematical community rallies behind Marcus Chun. Is Edmund Harrington afraid his daughter's boyfriend is smarter than him? The court of public opinion was shifting and Edmund was losing. But Edmund wasn't finished. He fired back with his own media blitz, giving carefully controlled interviews where he positioned himself as a concerned father trying to protect his naive daughter from a con artist. He produced financial experts who claimed Marcus had deliberately targeted Victoria for her wealth. He found disgruntled former colleagues from Henderson's shop who were willing to say Marcus was difficult and arrogant. The battle played out across newspapers and television screens and social media platforms, with millions of people weighing in on who was right and who was wrong. Through it all, Victoria and Marcus tried to maintain some semblance of normal life. He continued working at the shop during the day, though Henderson had to hire extra security to deal with the constant stream of reporters and curious onlookers. Victoria spent her days working with Margaret on the legal strategy, reviewing documents and preparing for depositions. Their evenings were spent together, cooking dinner at her apartment or his small studio, trying to remember what it felt like before their relationship became a public spectacle. One night, about 6 weeks into the legal battle, they were sitting on Victoria's couch reviewing legal documents when Marcus suddenly stood up and walked to the window. He stared out at the city lights, his shoulders rigid with tension. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about the equation, about what it represents." Victoria set down her papers. "What do you mean?" He turned to face her. "I spent 5 years solving that problem because I thought it would change my life. And it did, just not in the way I expected. I thought the prize would be money, financial security for my mom. But the real prize was you. Meeting you, knowing you, loving you. That's what the equation gave me. That's what made all those late nights worthwhile." Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes. "Marcus, where is this going?" He walked back to the couch and knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "I don't care about the lawsuit anymore. I don't care about recognition or credit or any of it. Let your father have the solution. Let him claim he disproved it or that I stole it or whatever lie he wants to tell. None of that matters compared to keeping you safe and ending this war." Victoria shook her head vehemently. "No. Absolutely not. That solution is yours. You earned it through years of work and sacrifice. I won't let you give it up." "Then marry me," Marcus said simply. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and perfect. "Victoria, I know it's fast. I know we've only been together for 2 months. I know the whole world is watching and judging every move we make. But I also know that I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. I know that you make me braver and better than I am on my own. And I know that if we're going to survive this fight with your father, we need to show him and the world that we're not afraid, that we're committed to each other no matter what he throws at us." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. The ring inside was simple, a single small diamond on a silver band. It wasn't expensive or elaborate. It was real, just like everything else about Marcus. "So Victoria Harrington," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "will you marry me? Will you take this fight all the way to the end? Together?" Victoria looked at the ring, at the man kneeling before her, at the life they could build together if they were brave enough to reach for it. She thought about her father's ultimatum, about the lawsuits and the media frenzy and all the obstacles still in their path, and she thought about Marcus's small office filled with mathematical proofs, about his mother's fierce acceptance, about the way his hand felt in hers. The choice was terrifyingly simple. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to everything." He slipped the ring on her finger, and they kissed there on her couch while the legal documents lay forgotten on the floor, and the city lights sparkled through the window. Outside, the world was still fighting their battle, still questioning their motives, still waiting to see if they would survive. But inside, in the quiet sanctuary of Victoria's apartment, two people who had found each other against impossible odds made a promise that no lawsuit, no media circus, and no disapproving father could break. The engagement announcement broke the internet. Victoria posted a simple photo on her social media, just her hand with the modest ring resting on top of Marcus's grease-stained fingers. With the caption, "He asked the most important question and I said yes." Within minutes, the post had tens of thousands of likes and comments. The media went into overdrive, with every outlet scrambling to be the first to analyze what this meant for the ongoing legal battle, for Edmund Harrington's reputation, for the fairy tale that had captivated millions. The reactions were predictably divided. Supporters flooded their accounts with congratulations and heart emoji, calling them relationship goals and celebrating their defiance of Edmund's attempts to keep them apart. Critics accused them of being attention seekers, claiming the engagement was a publicity stunt designed to gain sympathy before the court date. Some suggested Marcus was rushing Victoria to the altar to secure access to her money before the lawsuit bankrupted him. The vitriol was exhausting, but it was also becoming background noise. Victoria had learned to filter it out, to focus on what was real, and ignore the projections of strangers. What she couldn't ignore was her father's response. It came not through a phone call or a letter, but through his lawyers. Margaret called them 2 days after the engagement announcement, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Your father has amended his lawsuit. He's now claiming that Marcus's engagement to you is proof of a long-term con, that the entire equation solution was part of a calculated scheme to access the Harrington fortune. He's also petitioning the court for an emergency injunction to freeze your trust funds, claiming you're not of sound mind to make financial decisions while under Marcus's influence." Victoria felt the room tilt. "He's trying to have me declared incompetent?" Margaret's sigh was audible through the phone. "It's a Hail Mary move and it won't work. You're a 25-year-old woman with advanced degrees from Cambridge. No judge is going to declare you incompetent just because you fell in love with someone your father doesn't. But it shows how desperate he's getting. Desperate people are dangerous." That evening, Victoria and Marcus met with Rachel and Margaret in Margaret's downtown office. The mood was grim. They gathered around a conference table covered with legal documents, depositions, and trial strategies. Margaret walked them through the timeline. The motion to dismiss had been denied, which meant they were going to trial. The date was set for 3 weeks from now. Edmund's legal team was top tier, a squadron of attorneys from the most expensive firm in the city. They would be ruthless. "Our advantage," Margaret explained, "is that the mathematics are on our side. I've consulted with 3 independent experts, all of whom have confirmed that Marcus's solution is original and legitimate. The challenge for Edmund's team is going to be proving that somehow Marcus violated intellectual property law with a mathematical proof, which is essentially impossible under current copyright doctrine. Their real strategy is going to be character assassination. They're going to try to paint Marcus as a con artist and you as a naive victim." Rachel leaned forward. "So we need to be proactive. We need witnesses who can speak to Marcus's character, his work ethic, his genuine nature, people who knew him before any of this started." Marcus had been quiet throughout the meeting, his jaw tight. "Henderson will testify. He's known me for 6 years. He can speak to the nights I spent in that office, the work I put in. My mom will testify too, though I hate putting her through that." Margaret nodded. "That's good. We also need to establish the timeline clearly, show that Marcus began working on the equation years before he ever met Victoria, that his motivation was helping his mother, not accessing Harrington money." She looked at Victoria. "And we need you to be prepared for them to attack you on the stand. They're going to try to make you seem irrational, impulsive, rebellious against your father. You need to stay calm and stick to the truth." The next 3 weeks were brutal. They spent hours preparing for trial, running through mock testimony, anticipating every attack the opposition might launch. Marcus took time off from the shop, which he couldn't really afford but had no choice. Victoria barely slept, lying awake at night reviewing documents and imagining worst-case scenarios. The media coverage intensified as the trial date approached, with legal analysts on television dissecting every aspect of the case and offering predictions about who would win. The trial began on a gray Monday morning in late autumn. The courthouse was surrounded by reporters and photographers, creating a gauntlet that Victoria and Marcus had to walk through to reach the entrance. She held his hand tightly, keeping her eyes forward, ignoring the shouted questions. Inside, the courtroom was packed with observers, journalists, and curiosity seekers who had lined up hours early to get seats. And sitting in the front row behind the plaintiff's table was Edmund Harrington, his face carved from stone, his eyes fixed on his daughter with an expression of profound disappointment. The first 2 days of testimony were technical, with both sides presenting expert witnesses to debate the nature of mathematical proofs and intellectual property law. Victoria watched as professors and patent attorneys argued about whether Marcus's solution could be considered derivative of Edmund's original theorem. The mathematics were complex enough that she could see the judge and jury struggling to follow, which was exactly what Edmund's team wanted. If they could confuse the issue enough, create reasonable doubt about the originality of Marcus's work, they might win despite the weakness of their legal argument. On the third day, the trial shifted to character testimony. Edmund's lawyers called a parade of witnesses designed to paint Marcus as opportunistic and calculating. A former co-worker from an old job claimed Marcus had once talked about finding a rich wife. A math professor from a forum Marcus had used for help said he'd seemed obsessed with the Harrington equation, and an unhealthy way. Each piece of testimony was carefully crafted to create a narrative of manipulation and greed. Victoria watched Marcus's face grow paler with each witness, saw the doubt creeping into his eyes. This was the cruelty of her father's strategy, not just to win the case, but to destroy Marcus's sense of self, to make him question his own motives and memories. When it was their turn, Margaret was methodical and devastating. She called Henderson to the stand, and the old mechanic spoke with gruff honesty about Marcus's work ethic, his dedication, his genuine surprise when Victoria had said yes to dinner that first night. Henderson described finding Marcus in his office at 2 in the morning, covered in chalk dust, staring at mathematical proofs with an intensity that bordered on obsession. This wasn't a man chasing money. This was a man chasing truth. Lin Chun testified next, speaking through a translator. She described her son's childhood, the sacrifices he'd made when she got sick, the notebooks full of mathematics she'd found in his room. She looked directly at Edmund Harrington when she said, "My son is not a con artist. He is a devoted child who wanted to help his mother. If that is a crime, then every good son is guilty." The most powerful testimony came from Professor Whitmore, the mathematician who had collaborated with Edmund on the original theorem. Margaret had called him as an expert witness, but he turned out to be much more. He testified that Marcus's solution was not only legitimate, but represented a breakthrough in mathematical thinking that had implications far beyond the Harrington equation. He explained that the dimensional transformation Marcus had used was completely novel, that it opened new avenues of research. And then in a moment that seemed to surprise even Margaret, Whitmore turned to the judge and said, "Your Honor, I have worked with Edmund Harrington for 20 years. I know his brilliance and I know his ego. This lawsuit is not about protecting intellectual property. It's about a father who cannot accept that his daughter found someone who makes her happy. It's about a man who would rather destroy a young mathematician's career than admit he was wrong." Edmund's lawyers objected strenuously, but the damage was done. The jury had heard one of the most respected mathematicians in the country, Edmund's own colleague, essentially call him petty and vindictive. The mood in the courtroom shifted palpably. When Victoria took the stand on the 4th day, she was ready. Edmund's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Blackwell, approached her with the confidence of a shark circling prey. He asked her about her relationship history, about her tendency to rebel against her father's wishes, about whether she'd ever been diagnosed with any mental health conditions. Each question was designed to undermine her credibility, to suggest she was unstable or easily manipulated. Victoria answered each question with calm precision. She spoke about growing up in her father's shadow, about the pressure to be perfect, about the loneliness of being valued for her last name rather than her personhood. She described watching Marcus solve the equation, the genuine brilliance she'd witnessed, the 5 years of work evident in every step of his proof. And when Blackwell tried to suggest she'd been seduced by the romance of the story rather than any genuine connection, she looked him directly in the eye and said, "I fell in love with Marcus Chun because he saw me as a person, not a possession. He asked me to dinner, not for my money, but because he wanted to know me. That's not manipulation. That's the foundation of every healthy relationship." Blackwell tried one more angle. "Isn't it true, Miss Harrington, that you stand to inherit a substantial fortune? That by marrying Mr. Chun, you would be giving him access to that wealth?" Victoria smiled, a sad, knowing expression. "I stood to inherit a fortune, Mr. Blackwell, past tense. My father made it very clear that choosing Marcus meant choosing to be disinherited. So no, Marcus gains no financial benefit from marrying me. If anything, he's taking on the burden of supporting someone who gave up everything for him." She paused, looking past the lawyer to where her father sat. "And I would make that choice again in a heartbeat." The courtroom was silent. Edmund's face had gone ashen. Even Blackwell seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Margaret had no redirect questions. Victoria's testimony spoke for itself. As she stepped down from the witness stand, she walked past her father without looking at him. She could feel his eyes on her, could sense the rage and hurt and something else, something that might have been regret. But she kept walking, returning to Marcus's side, taking his hand in hers. Whatever the verdict, they would face it together. The jury deliberated for 2 days. 2 days of excruciating limbo where Victoria and Marcus could do nothing but wait and imagine every possible outcome. They stayed in her apartment, trying to distract themselves with movies and cooking and conversation. But the trial hung over everything like a storm cloud. Rachel stayed with them, partly as moral support and partly as protection against the reporters, who had taken up permanent residence outside the building. On the afternoon of the 2nd day, Margaret called. "The jury has reached a verdict. We need to be at the courthouse in an hour." The drive downtown felt surreal, like moving through a dream. Victoria held Marcus's hand in the back of Margaret's car, neither of them speaking. What was there to say? They had done everything they could. They had told their truth. Now it was in the hands of 12 strangers who would decide their fate based on evidence and arguments and their own interpretations of justice. When they arrived at the courthouse, the media circus was even more intense. Reporters surged forward as they exited the car, shouting questions that blurred into meaningless noise. Security cleared a path, and they made their way inside. The courtroom was packed again, every seat filled with spectators eager to witness the conclusion of a story that had captivated the nation. Victoria and Marcus took their seats at the defense table. Across the aisle, Edmund sat with his team of lawyers, his face an unreadable mask. For a moment their eyes met, father and daughter, and Victoria saw something flicker in his expression. Pain, perhaps, or recognition of what he had lost in his quest to control her life. Then the moment passed and he looked away. The judge entered, and everyone rose. The jury filed in, their faces carefully neutral. Victoria tried to read something in their expressions, some hint of what they had decided, but found nothing. The foreman, a middle-aged woman in a cardigan, handed a folded piece of paper to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. The judge read it silently, her face betraying nothing, then looked out at the courtroom. "In the matter of Harrington versus Chun," she began, her voice formal and measured, "the jury finds in favor of the defendant on all counts." The words took a moment to penetrate. Victoria felt Marcus go rigid beside her, felt her own breath catch in her throat. They had won. Against all odds, against her father's money and power and vindictive determination, they had won. The judge continued speaking, explaining the jury's reasoning, but Victoria barely heard it. She was aware of Margaret's hand on her shoulder, of Rachel's quiet yes from behind, of the explosion of noise from the gallery as reporters and observers reacted to the verdict. She turned to Marcus and saw tears streaming down his face. They fell into each other's arms, holding on like drowning people who had just been thrown a lifeline. "We won," Marcus whispered against her hair. "We actually won." Around them, chaos erupted. Edmund's lawyers were gathering their materials with stiff, angry movements. Margaret was fielding questions from reporters who had somehow gotten past the bailiffs. The judge was banging her gavel, trying to restore order. But Victoria was aware of only one thing: her father standing alone at the plaintiff's table, watching his daughter embrace the man he had tried to destroy. Their eyes met again, and this time Edmund didn't look away. The judge made one more announcement that cut through the noise. "Furthermore, after reviewing the evidence presented in this case, I am awarding sanctions against the plaintiff for bringing a frivolous lawsuit. Mr. Harrington, you are ordered to pay the defendant's legal fees in full, as well as a penalty of $500,000 for abuse of the legal fee. This court will not tolerate the weaponization of litigation to settle personal grievances." The courtroom erupted again. This wasn't just a victory. It was a complete vindication. Edmund Harrington, one of the most powerful men in the country, had been publicly rebuked by a judge in order to pay Marcus's legal bills. The humiliation was total. Victoria watched her father's face go white, watched him grip the edge of the table as if to steady himself. For the first time in her life, she saw him look defeated. Security escorted them out through a back entrance to avoid the worst of the media crush. They emerged into a gray afternoon, the sky threatening rain. Margaret was already on her phone, fielding interview requests and preparing a statement. Rachel was coordinating with Henderson, who had driven separately to arrange a place where they could all decompress away from cameras. But Victoria couldn't move. She stood on the courthouse steps, Marcus's arm around her shoulders, and felt the weight of the last 3 months finally lifting. "It's over," she said, the words barely audible. "It's really over." Marcus kissed the top of her head. "We can finally breathe." They went to Henderson's house, a modest two-story in a working-class neighborhood where the reporters wouldn't think to look. Henderson's wife, a warm woman named Marie, had prepared enough food to feed an army. Lynn arrived shortly after they did, pulling Marcus into a fierce embrace and speaking rapid Cantonese that needed no translation. She had tears in her eyes when she turned to Victoria and said in English, "You are strong, like daughter to me. You make my son happy. That is all that matters." They ate and talked and laughed, the tension of the trial finally draining away. Margaret explained that with the sanctions awarded by the judge, they would not only recoup their legal costs but have money left over. It was a complete reversal of what Edmund had intended. He had tried to bankrupt them and ended up paying them instead. Rachel proposed a toast, raising her glass of wine, to Victoria and Marcus, to fighting the good fight and winning, to proving that love and truth are stronger than money and power. They all drank, and Victoria felt tears on her cheeks again, but these were different. These were tears of relief and joy and overwhelming gratitude for the people around this table who had supported them through the darkest time. As the evening wore on and the conversation flowed, Victoria found herself stepping outside onto Henderson's back porch for a moment of quiet. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. She leaned against the railing and breathed in the cool air, savoring the feeling of peace. She heard the door open behind her and turned to see Marcus joining her. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Victoria leaned back into him. "I'm thinking about the night you walked into that ballroom, how scared you must have been. How brave." She turned in his arms to face him. "I'm thinking about everything we've been through since then, and how grateful I am that you didn't give up." Marcus smiled, that gentle expression that had captured her heart from the beginning. "You made it impossible to give up. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You stood beside me when it would have been easier to walk away." "Victoria, I know we've talked about getting married, but we haven't set a date. We've been too caught up in surviving." He paused, searching her face. "I don't want to wait anymore. I don't want to spend another day not being your husband. So I'm asking you, how do you feel about a small ceremony? Something simple. Just the people we love. No media, No spectacle, just us, making promises that no one can take away. Victoria felt her heart swell with love for this man who had turned her world upside down in the best possible way. I think that sounds perfect. When? Marcus grinned. How about next weekend we can do it at my mom's restaurant? She cook, Henderson can be my best man, Rachel can be your maid of honor. We'll invite maybe 20 people, the ones who stood by us through all of this. Next weekend, Victoria repeated, testing the words. She thought about the media frenzy that would inevitably follow, the headlines and speculation. Then she thought about standing in Lynn's restaurant surrounded by love, promising forever to the man who had shown her what freedom felt like. Yes, let's do it. Let's get married next weekend. They kissed there on Henderson's porch while the sun set, and their friends laughed inside and somewhere across the city. Her father sat in his empty mansion contemplating the price of his pride. Victoria had spent her whole life in her father's shadow, shaped by his expectations and suffocated by his control. But standing here with Marcus, she finally understood what it meant to step into her own light. The trial was over. The verdict was in. They had won not just in court, but in the larger battle for their right to choose their own path, to love who they wanted to love, to build a life on their own terms. Inside, someone called their names. Dinner was ready. They went back in together hand in hand and took their seats at a table full of people who had become their chosen family. The conversation flowed around them, plans already being made for the wedding. Jokes about Marcus needing to learn how to dance for the reception. Lynn insisting she would make the wedding feast herself and wouldn't hear any arguments. Victoria looked around the table at these faces, these good people who had stood with them when it mattered most, and felt a contentment deeper than anything she'd known in her carefully curated former life. Later that night, as Marcus drove them back to her apartment, Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She almost didn't check it, assuming it was another reporter, but something made her look. The message was simple, just 3 words. I was wrong. She stared at the screen, her heart beginning to pound. The number wasn't saved in her contacts, but she recognized it. It was her father's private cell phone, the one only family had. She showed the text to Marcus, who read it while stopped at a red light. His expression was unreadable. What are you going to do? He asked. Victoria thought about everything her father had put them through. The lawsuit, the character assassination, the attempt to control her life through money and intimidation. She thought about standing in that courtroom and watching him be humiliated by the judge. She thought about 3 words that might be the closest Edmund Harrington had ever come to an apology. I don't know, she said honestly. But not tonight. Tonight is ours. We won. We're getting married. That's all that matters right now. Marcus nodded and took her hand as the light turned green. Tomorrow they would figure out what, if anything, her father's message meant. Tomorrow they would start planning a wedding and thinking about their future. But tonight they drove through the city together. 2 people who had survived a war and come out the other side stronger, more certain, more ready to face whatever came next. The equation had been solved. The trial was over. Now came the best part, building a life together one day at a time with love as their only guide. The week before the wedding passed in a blur of joyful chaos. Lynn took complete control of the menu planning, shooing Victoria and Marcus out of the restaurant kitchen whenever they tried to help. Rachel handled the logistics with the efficiency of a military commander, coordinating with Henderson about chairs and tables, arranging for a small string quartet, even finding a judge willing to perform the ceremony on a Saturday evening. Marcus spent his days at the shop, finishing up projects so he could take a week off for a honeymoon. Victoria found herself in the strange position of having nothing to do professionally for the first time in years, and discovered she didn't mind at all. She hadn't responded to her father's text. Every time she picked up her phone to type a reply, she found herself unable to choose the right word. What did you say to a man who had tried to destroy your happiness and then, after losing, sent a 3-word apology? Part of her wanted to ignore it entirely, to let the silence speak for itself. Another part, that remembered being a little girl sitting on her father's shoulders, felt the pull of old loyalty and wondered if there might be a path to reconciliation. The answer came on Friday morning, the day before the wedding. Victoria was in her apartment packing a small bag for the honeymoon. A week at a cabin in the mountains that Henderson had offered to lend them when her doorbell rang. She opened it to find her father standing in the hallway. He looked older than she remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper, his shoulders slightly bowed. He was holding a wrapped package, simple brown paper tied with string. "May I come in?" Edmund asked, his voice lacking the commanding tone she'd grown up with. He sounded tired, uncertain. Victoria hesitated, then stepped aside. Her father entered the apartment, looking around at the space as if seeing it for the first time, though he'd been here once before to deliver his ultimatum. He set the package on her coffee table and stood awkwardly, a man accustomed to controlling every situation suddenly at a loss. "I don't expect forgiveness," he began without preamble. "What I did was inexcusable. I let my pride and my fear drive me to hurt you in ways I can never take back." He looked at her and she saw genuine anguish in his eyes. "When your mother died, you were all I had left. I built my empire for you, created a world where you would never want for anything. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that what you needed wasn't money or position. It was the freedom to choose your own life." Victoria felt tears building but refused to let them fall. "You tried to destroy the man I love." Edmund nodded slowly. "I did, because I couldn't accept that he was what you needed. I saw him as a threat, as someone trying to take you away from me." He gestured to the package. "I had my team investigate Marcus after the trial. I wanted to find proof that I'd been right, that he was using you. Do you know what they found?" Victoria shook her head, not trusting her voice. They found a man who worked 2 jobs to put himself through community college before his mother got sick. They found 5 years of library checkout records, advanced mathematics textbooks borrowed and renewed over and over. They found the notebooks he kept, the ones where he worked through your solutions step by step, teaching himself everything he needed to know. They found testimonials from every person who's ever worked with him, all saying the same thing. Marcus Chun is brilliant, dedicated, and fundamentally decent. He opened the package, revealing a leather-bound book. I had this made. It's his solution. The proof he presented that night, professionally typeset and bound, with annotations from Professor Whitmore and 2 other leading mathematicians explaining why it's revolutionary. Victoria picked up the book, her hands trembling. On the title page, in elegant script, it read, The Chun Transformation, a novel approach to the Harrington equation, by Marcus Chun. Below that was a dedication for Lin Chun, who gave everything, and for Victoria Harrington, who saw what others missed. Your father continued, his voice rough with emotion. I'm having this published in the Journal of Advanced Mathematics, with full credit to Marcus, and I'm establishing a fellowship in his name at MIT, fully funded, for students who want to pursue mathematical research but lack the financial means. It's not enough. Nothing I do can undo the damage I've caused, but it's a start. Victoria looked at her father, this man who had shaped her entire life, who had tried to control every aspect of her existence, and saw him truly vulnerable for the first time. Why now? She asked. Why the change of heart? Edmund walked to the window, staring out at the city. Because I watched you on that witness stand. I watched you choose him, choose love, choose a life I couldn't control, and I realized I had 2 choices. I could keep fighting and lose you forever, or I could accept that you're not a child anymore. You're a brilliant woman who knows her own mind. And if Marcus's Chun makes you happy, if he sees you the way I should have seen you all along, as a person and not a possession, then I was wrong to try to keep you apart. He turned back to face her. I'm not asking to walk you down the aisle tomorrow. I know I've lost that right. Just ask eventually, when you're ready, if we might find a way back to being father and daughter again. Not the relationship we had before, where I controlled everything, but something new. Something built on respect instead of authority. Victoria set down the book and crossed the room to stand in front of her father. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then she said quietly, I'm not ready to forgive you yet. What you did hurt too much, but I believe you're trying to change, and that's something. Edmund nodded, relief washing across his face. It's more than I deserve. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Inside is a check, not for you, for Lynn's restaurant, to pay off her debts, with enough left over for renovations and expansion. Please give it to her with my apology. Tell her I'm sorry for trying to destroy her son. Victoria took the envelope, stunned. She had never heard her father apologize to anyone, let alone acknowledge a wrong so completely. I'll give it to her. Edmund moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. This was your mother's. She wore it on our wedding day. I was going to give it to you at your wedding when the time came, but I forfeited that moment with my actions. I'd still like you to have it, if you want it. He opened the box to reveal a delicate bracelet, silver with small sapphires that caught the light. Victoria remembered her mother wearing it, remembered playing with it as a child while sitting in. He opened the box to reveal a delicate bracelet, silver with small sapphires that caught the light. Victoria remembered her mother wearing it, remembered playing with it as a child while sitting in. Victoria stood in her empty apartment holding her mother's bracelet and crying for everything that had been lost and broken, and for the fragile possibility of something new being built from the ruins. The next evening, Chun's noodle house was transformed. The tables had been pushed aside to create an open space. Paper lanterns hung from the ceiling, casting warm light over everything. The small string quartet was set up in one corner, playing soft classical music. There were about 25 people there, the ones who mattered most. Henderson and Marie, Rachel and her husband, Margaret Wu, Professor Whitmore, who had asked to attend, the mechanics from the shop, and several regular customers from the restaurant who had become like family to Lynn over the years. Victoria stood in the small back office where Marcus had spent 5 years solving an impossible equation, wearing a simple white dress and her mother's bracelet. Rachel was with her, adjusting her hair and trying not to cry. You look beautiful, Rachel said, like yourself. That's the best kind of beautiful. There was a soft knock and Lynn entered carrying a small bouquet of white orchids. For you, she said simply. In my culture, orchids mean love and beauty and strength. You have all 3. Victoria hugged her future mother-in-law, this woman who had welcomed her with such fierce protectiveness. Thank you, Lynn, for everything, for raising such an extraordinary man, for accepting me into your family. Lynn patted her cheek. You make my son happy. That make you my daughter. She smiled, a rare full smile that transformed her severe features. Now come. He is waiting, and he is nervous. I can tell because he keeps checking his tie. The ceremony was simple and perfect. Marcus stood at the front of the restaurant in a dark suit, Henderson beside him as best man, and when Victoria walked down the makeshift aisle with Rachel, his face lit up with such joy it took her breath away. The judge spoke about love and commitment and choosing to build a life together. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to face the impossible together, to believe in each other when doubt crept in, to choose love over fear every single day. When Marcus slipped the wedding band onto her finger, he whispered, "You saved my life." When she placed kissed his ring, she whispered back, "No, you saved mine." The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise. Their friends erupted in applause and cheers. Lynn was crying openly, clutching Henderson's arm. Rachel was sobbing into her husband's shoulder. Professor Whitmore was beaming like a proud grandfather. And Victoria, standing there with her husband's arms around her, felt a completeness she had never experienced before. The reception was loud and joyful. They ate Lynn's incredible food and danced to the string quartet and listened to embarrassing toasts from Henderson and heartfelt ones from Rachel. At one point, Victoria caught Marcus staring at the wall where his mathematical proofs had once hung, now decorated with photos of their journey together. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He pulled her close. "I'm thinking about the night I first saw your picture. I was so tired, ready to give up. And then I saw you talking about mathematics with such passion, and I thought, if I can solve this equation, I can meet her. I can show her what I've done. And maybe, just maybe, she'll understand why it mattered." "And do I?" Victoria asked. "Do I understand?" Marcus kissed her forehead. "You understand better than anyone. You understand that some problems are worth spending 5 years solving, that some people are worth fighting for. That love is the most beautiful equation of all." They danced until late in the night, surrounded by love and laughter, and when they finally left, heading to Henderson's cabin in the mountains for their honeymoon, Victoria looked back at the little restaurant where so much had happened, where Marcus had worked in secret, where his mother had built a life, where they had just promised forever to each other. It wasn't glamorous or grand, it was real, and that made it perfect. 3 months ago, a mechanic had walked into a ballroom and solved an impossible equation, but the real solution, the one that mattered most, hadn't been written on a blackboard. It had been written in their hearts. The equation of two people who found each other against impossible odds and chose love over everything else. And that, Victoria thought as Marcus drove them toward their future, was the most elegant proof of all.